Hi, everybody. I'm back again, and I'm still in the same place I was before. It's just for a couple of days, and I'm really sorry. Um, Twitch, I wanted to try and position myself better, but I'm at a Dutch angle tonight, and and also very janky. So be prepared for the camera to collapse. It is what it is. Um, so for those of you who are just tuning in, my name is Beth, and I am currently reading my dad's manuscript. Um, I'm reading many of them, but this one is called The Saga of Haram, and I am on chapter 22 of 32. So, for those of you who are just tuning in, please go back to the beginning and listen because that'll be better than trying to do it coming in today because it will not make a lot of sense. At any rate, again, I'm going to just launch right into it because I'm trying to read 3 chapters, so that's gonna take me about an hour, but I have to edit even more. I have a good I have several chapters to edit tonight, so including the ones I'm reading tonight. I'll be marking them up as we go, so you'll hear the marker go off and then my head go down, and that's me marking this up. You will also occasionally yeah, there will occasionally be cats. That's because I'm in the living room right now, so they're going to be, it's their domain, so I don't really have a choice. I'm encroaching on them. And that'll be Artemis. She will have her say as well. Yeah. So it'll be me and the cats telling you a story tonight. Mostly Artemis, although she may be off camera. But you might be able to hear her still. Anyway, without further ado, I will start on chapter 22 of the Saga of Haram. Now, I will have to refresh myself on where we left off. There was quite a bit going on. Right. They were heading off to go get some goblins. Now, I realize that in more modern times, goblins are now player characters in D&D, so they've got more of a humane role. This is an older time, back when goblins were much more cruel to people. So, we start with that. Down below, the trail wound past a willow-covered hillside. It appeared that the goblins had lain in wait on the hillside and had loosed their arrows as the pack train passed by. They had loosed more arrows into the confusion that followed, and then rushed to the attack. Most of the guards who'd been targets of the first arrows were down, and the attacking goblins numbered about 30. The caravan master, who had himself taken an arrow in the shoulder, was trying to organize the remaining guards and muleteers into some sort of defense. Haram loosed his first arrow, and was pleased to see it take a goblin through the neck. He loosed a second arrow, but it went wide, as did his third. By the time he noticed that Dareth Gan was shooting as well, short black arrows which stuck with amazing accuracy. Snorting with disgust, Haram dropped his bow, drew his sword. He galloped into the midst of the goblins, striking with his sword, and felt the blow go home. But the horse carried him past before he could tell what damage he had done. He turned the horse and saw a goblin spear thrusting up at him. He slipped that with his shield, then struck a return blow. He missed, but again the horse carried him past before he could strike again. It occurred to him that fighting on horseback was a little more difficult than he had imagined. Kicking free of the stirrups, he dropped to the ground. A swarthy goblin came snarling at him, slashing with a sword. Haram caught the sword on his shield and stepped in with the return thrust to take the goblin in the stomach. As he pulled the sword free, he saw the others closing in around him, and suddenly a red haze began to descend over his eyes. As if from far away, he heard his own voice shouting in the goblin language. Suddenly his vision cleared, and he was standing blinking in the sun, gasping for breath. Across from him, a group of men were staring at him, fear playing on their faces. His wits began to come back, and he remembered someone. Yes, it was someone. Yes, Borath. That was it. That was it. Warning him about the battle madness and how men might feel about it. He looked around him. There were no live goblins in sight. Stooping, he wiped his sword on a goblin kilt, then sheathed it. He walked over to where the merchant stood with his people. They all shrank back from him, save for the merchant himself, who, making an obvious effort to master his own fear, held his ground. May I know your name, sir? The merchant asked, that I might better show my appreciation. My name is Haram. Haram of the... Yes, of course. I am Eric Agarad, merchant of Norilandum. On behalf of myself and my men, I thank you, Haram, and best we should see to your wounds immediately. Haram looked down at himself and grimaced. No, despite the gory mess you see, little of this blood is mine. I have only a few nicks and scratches. But yourself, Agarad, you ought to have that shoulder bound up. Is there nothing we can do for you then? Perhaps there is. If you could get me a skin of water and a bowl, and perhaps a rag of cloth, I would appreciate it very much. Agarad turned and walked away, calling out as he went, Amalad, come here, boy. Haram sank down where he stood, sitting cross-legged on the ground. Dareth Gan was suddenly behind him. You left your bow behind, he said. I left my wits behind, he replied. That's not what it actually says, but I had to add in, he replied. Dareth Gan was grinning at him. Oh, indeed, there's no doubt of that. I have caught up your horse, unstrung your bow, and slowed it with the rest of your and stowed it with the rest of your gear. I thank you. Give me a second here. I thank you, answered Haram. Ah, so formal. After all, you had other things on your mind. Haram snorted. I had no mind at all, and all the folk of the merchant train fear me. What of you, Darascan? Do you fear me? I fear you? Ought I to fear you? Is it not your enemies that ought to fear you? No, Haram, I do not fear you. At least not yet. Not until I've done something to arouse your anger. Suddenly there was a small boy in front of Haram, about a boy of about 9 or 10 years, carrying a water skin, a bowl, and a towel. Sir? He said diffidently. Ah, said Haram, the water. Good. What is your name, boy? I'm a lad, sir. Thank you, I'm a lad. Now, Gareth Gan, if you'd be so good as to pour about half of the water skin over my right side, I would be grateful. Gareth Gan complied, and then Harem, still shivering from the water, began began to work his way out of his chain armor. Boy, their rings chimed softly as he dropped the chain shirt onto the grass in front of him. He looked at it. This will have to be dried and oiled soon. So oh boy. Okay, hold on here. Yeah. The ring chimed softly as he dropped the chain shirt onto the grass in front of him. He looked at it. That will have to be dried and oiled soon, ere the rest begin to work on it. Amalad, would you go to your master and ask him if he will allow you to help me for a while? If he agrees, find some oil and come back and deal with my armor. Oh, sorry. If he agrees, find some oil and come back and deal with my armor? No need to ask, sir. He will let me, I am sure. And so am I, but out of politeness, he ought to be asked first. Now, go on. As Amalad hurried off, Harren began to wash himself. It only comes on me when I fight goblins, you know. What is that? The battle madness. I fought other times in other places. It is only when I fight goblins that the battle madness comes. And not always then, either. However that might be, it has served you well. Only 5 or so of the goblins escaped. At first they thought you easy prey. Then when they discovered their mistake and began to try to escape you, it was too late. Harem shivered, and in it was only due in part to the cold water. I killed very many then? Yes, you did. Sufficient to be sure that all the men of the caravan will walk carefully around you. I hardly needed that. Respect is one thing, fear is quite another. Amalad was back then with assurances that his master had given him permission to do whatever Hera might require of him. As he watched the boy go to work, Harem asked, what did you do when the goblins attacked Amalad? The boy reddened. Dived under a bush, he muttered. Now that is good sense for you, said Harem. Then, seeing the look on the boy's fat face, he said, No, I mean that. Some boys of your age might think it necessary that they stand up to goblins with their bare hands and die for it. A good part of the trade of a fighter is in knowing when not to fight. Am I not correct, Derek Gann? You are quite correct. But Dareth Gann leaned down and whispered, One who rides full tilt into 3 dozen goblins by himself ought perhaps not to preach caution to others? Harem laughed. While Harem was washing, Dareth Gann collected the spoil from the goblins. He brought back three gold coins, 20 silver ponies, and another 6 silver coins of other sorts, and a number of copper ones. There were also 3 gems which appeared to be valuable. I thought it not worth the bother to collect goblin weapons or armor, he said on his return. No, not unless there were some particularly decorative weapon that we might sell to some townsman as a sort of a goblin chief. Is that not a trifle dishonest? Well, if I were to begin by saying that this was truly the sword of the goblin chief, it might be. But if I say the truth, very few goblins own a weapon such as this, and let the prospective buyer draw his own conclusions, then I have cheated no one. As it is hardly worth the bother of taking such a weapon along. A little later, the master of the caravan approached Hiram once more. What reward do you ask for your assistance? Hiram shrugged. No reward is necessary, master. Perhaps you would let us travel with you as far as Sandaris, if you are going that way. Sandaris? Yes, we go that far. But surely you will want more than our company. Master Agarad, we took enough from the goblins to maintain ourselves for several weeks. But if you would do more, you might seek for news of a venturer, a swordswoman named Cariel. If you hear of her, send word to me through an inn at Ifan Sor, owned by a man named Vorath. A swordswoman named Cariel? Yes, I can seek news of her. If I should meet her personally, is there a message? Only that Harem sends his regards, and if she wishes to send a message to me, she may send it to the same place, Vorath's Inn at Ifan Sor. At the end of several uneventful days, they were resting in Sandaris. Dareth Gan asked Harem, Where are we bound from here? I am bound southward to Rathahan, then back east to Yathar. You needn't accompany me all the way. Ah, said Dareth Gan with a grin. But you recall what old Cora said? If I desert you now, what might happen to me? And you did save my life, and I may not be safe to travel with. The god Drauha has a grudge against me. Indeed, indeed. Twice I fought men bearing his symbol, who sought me out to kill me. I've been warned as well, by one who ought to know, that there may be hired killers out for my blood. Men who serve the god of lies, but who will not approach me openly. And if you are too near, you may suffer as well. Ah, but if hired killers are seeking you, would it not be a help to you to have one by your side who knows many of the tricks of the trade? I had thought you denied being an assassin. No, I didn't deny it, though truth to say, I have killed no one for hire as yet, only using my weapons in self-defense, which is not assassination, and I am trained in all the tricks, as I have said. Well, if you wish to come, I will be glad of the company. And as he said that, Harry realized that he was indeed very glad for the company. So they rode south to Rathahan, then turned west. Without incident, they rode through Ninantha, then along the long distance to the Great Wood and the town of Lisan Hawar, down to Sandan Hawar, then northward again to Yathhawar. As they went, Dareth Gan aided Harem in the evenings to practice his sword work, and taught him a few tricks regarding the use of the dagger and the staff. On the evening before they finally arrived at Yathhawar, Dareth Gan asked, Do you hope that by always moving you will evade those who seek you? Harem frowned, then said, I hadn't thought of it in that light, but belike it will serve to do that as well. No, I continue to travel for the reason I have yet to find a place where I would like to stay. So, if I were a killer seeking the life of the one who is constantly traveling, I would probably not follow him from hither to yon, unless I knew I was a day or less behind him. Rather, I'd wait in a city, for such a traveler would almost certainly come to a city eventually. Do you suggest that I should avoid the cities then? No, not entirely, but I would suggest that you walk more warily in the cities than elsewhere. Their first night in Yathhawar was uneventful. They found an inn, one frequented by adventurers, and engaged rooms. That done, they approached the adventurers in the common room, drinking ale with them, and seeking any news. There was a good deal of news of people who had gotten rich by fighting goblins, ogres, trolls, dragons, griffins, and the like, of people who had been killed by fighting goblins, ogres, trolls, dragons, griffins, and the like, of people who had gone seeking treasure and fallen afoul of the elves, and much more. One of the crew, a pop-eyed little fellow, not Popeye, but pop-eyed little fellow, more than a little drunk, said that he'd heard of this harem Grimface who was being hunted by the killer sent by Dramaha. What? I don't know if that's a misspelling or if he's drunk and talking like this. I don't know. Said that he'd heard of Harem Grimface, who was hunted by killers sent by Dramaha, the Lord of Lies out of Shandakar. But Harem dispatches any of that. But this Harem dispatches any that find him with one or two blows of his sword. A dark-faced Rahassan nudged Harem. Your name's Harem, is it not? Are you the one he's talking about? Harem laughed. Do I look so fearsome then? There was no word of a swordswoman named Hariel. The second night was much the same. Some of the company of the previous night were still there, while others had left, and new ones had taken their places. There was talk of Zilba's band. I hear they come back out of Trethison in quite a big rush, said one broad-chested, red-faced swordsman. But I hear they brought back some treasure. 4 sacks it was, as big as my head, each of them, stuffed with silver and gold and jewels. Oh, but they brought back gold and silver, all right, responded a bandy-legged Shandakaranian. That was the least of it. Besides the rest, they brought back some of this magical works the elves are so famous for. They've got a wand that can blast an enemy into a cinder in the wink of an eye. I heard there was a bow that I, I heard it was a bow that never misses the mark, declared a sender from the. Excuse me. I heard it was a boat that never misses its mark, declared a slender man from the northeast coast, showing evidence of some Rahassian ancestry in his curly dark hair. Nonsense, declared a blunt-spoken southerner, his fair hair flashing in the torchlight. We've got a flute that, if you play it right, can make people or animals fall asleep, or even enchant them to do your will. Discussion raged hot and heavy over this topic, and slipped into the topic of what might be the use of a magic wand that blasted people to cinders, but also destroyed anything valuable they might be carrying. Hiram contented himself with listening to the discussion, and eventually he and Dareth Gann retired to their chamber for the night. That night, Hiram was suddenly awakened to the sounds of movement in the room. He was reaching for his sword when he heard a bow on flesh. Then something clattered to the floor. A moment later, Dareth Gann's voice said, Hiram, would you make a light? What? 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 Okay, so that happened. That was chapter 22, everybody. So I'm going to take a quick drink here. Yeah, and you'll also have to pardon my speech tonight. Um, I'm having an allergic reaction in my mouth, so it's hard for me to talk. So I'm trying to enunciate as best I can. So if I sound a little weird because I'm over enunciating, that's what's happening. But I need to get through this. And now I need to find out what was that? What was that? Bone hit flesh. And then there again said, Sharon, can I get a light, please? Okay. Okay. Now what's going on? Chapter 23. Sharon, wow, that's not a word. Well, actually, I'm going to have to double check on that. I'm not sure. It says lighted, but that feels wrong. But then again, grammar sometimes can be tricky. So I have to look it up because I'm going to use both. Harem lit or lit lighted a candle and looked around. See, I'm building tension by not talking about what happens next. And looked around. On the floor was the body of a slightly built man, clad in black from head to foot. Near his hand was a short dagger. Dareth Gann was kneeling over him, a bloody dagger in his own hand. He wiped his dagger on the man's jacket and looked up at Haram. So now you have saved my life, Dareth Gann. I warned you that it would be dangerous traveling with me. His companion rose from the floor and sat on his bed. I fear that I'm in danger whether I travel with you or alone. I suppose the time has come to tell the full truth. Some time back, the Haranasp of Shebnazdig put 2 gold coins in my hand with a promise of more if I should bring back your head. He asked me if I would swear to allegiance to Drauha, but I declined. I went on my way. I swear to you that when I approached you first, all I saw was a young man with a full wallet. When I did find out who you were, it was too late. I've been writing to you for some weeks, and you are still alive. If that word has not yet reached Shabnazdig, it's only a matter of a week or two. After that, there will be a price on my head as well. Haram frowned. This fellow, he indicated the dead man, is he one of the hidden folk? I believe so. You needn't worry. The brotherhood of the hidden folk is not so tight knit as all that. It could not be, do you see? If one man is hired to protect the secrets of a lord and another is hired to uncover those secrets, someone is likely to die. Oh, members of the brotherhood are not under hire at any time, who are not under hire at any time, might possibly give aid to another brother in need if they make some private agreement between themselves. No, I have made myself your friend, and that will follow me whether I continue to travel with you or not. Then I suppose we'd best continue to ride together, that each might watch the other's back. Dareth Gann grinned. I suppose that's the only answer. I hope you're not angry with me for keeping all this from you. How should I be angry? Didn't you save my life just now? Then, to change the subject, he asked, and what of this fellow? What shall we do with him? He came in at the window. If we dump him back out the window and deny all knowledge of him, that should serve. So, will you take his head or his feet? While they were disposing of the body, Hiram noticed this. This is not funny. I'm sorry. not funny. While they were disposing of the body, Hiram noticed a small grappling hook lodged in the windowsill. It was attached to a thin rod which dangled down toward the street. Look at this! Ah, so this is how he came in. A very useful tool. Dareth Gann drew the rod in, giving a careful twist at certain places to break it down into several sections, each no longer than his arm. You see, one may toss a hook up to a windowsill, but if someone within that room is awake or even merely a light sleeper, they may be alerted by the noise it makes. This way, one places the hook carefully and can pull himself up on the rod much as one would use a rope. Very useful. And this tool by itself would mark the fellow as one of the hidden folk. It is the sort of thing we use. They left early the next day, riding out the north gate. They made no effort to hide their going. After all, said Gareth Dan, if anyone wishes to track us, it won't be difficult to say which way we have gone. However, once they had gotten out of the sight of the city, they left the road and traveled east, straight into the Vorth Hauer, the great forest. They carefully chose a place to leave the road, going over the hard ground so the tracks of the horses might be less easily seen. It depends, said Hiram, on who it is that follows us. A skilled tracker would be able to find our trail, even here. We must not depend on such on tracks. Sorry, guys. Thanks, Irene. Okay, I think I have to backtrack a bit. They left early the next day, riding out the north gate. They made no effort to hide their going. After all, said Dareth Gann, if anyone wishes to track us, it won't be difficult to find people to say which way we have gone. However, once they had gotten out of sight of the city, they left the road and traveled east, straight into Vorath Hauer, the great forest. They carefully chose a place to leave the road, going over hard ground so the tracks of the horses might be less easily seen. It depends, said Hiram, on who it is that follows us. A skilled tracker would be able to follow our trail, even here. But we must not depend on such tricks as this to throw them off the scent. Will you go into Vorath Tower then? I don't think that probably should be we. Thank you for your comment, Irene. Yes, we will strike the road on the far side of the forest. I hope it will be safe. There are strange things said of that wood. Strange things? What manner of strange things? It is said, for instance, that the deeper parts of the wood are elven territory, places where the world of elves marches closely with the world of men, and that it may not be safe to trespass there casually. Ah, Harum considered this for a while, then said, we shall try to move across without giving any offense to any. Wait, without giving offense to any. Bear with me here. We can also hope that the tales of the forest will convince our pursuers that we would not go that way either. Gareth Dan, sorry, Gareth, I don't like it. There is some risk, no doubt, but it ought to throw our pursuers off the track, which would be to our benefit. Sorry, bear with me, guys. Thank you for your help. And just bear with me. Okay, sorry guys. I'm like doing horrible things here. No. There you go. I tried. Sorry. I'm like busy trying to be. It's hard being a one person show, guys. So, like, for those of you who are just tuning in, I'm taking a quick break for a quick second here just to kind of say I am not able to manage a chat while I'm trying to read the story. I just pulled up the chat to try and take a look at it. Thank you, everybody, for not saying anything. Not that I don't want you to talk, because you guys can talk amongst yourselves, but I can't really say anything because it's hard for me to try and go back and forth. And then it's already a lot of dead air anyway. Back to the story. Will we go into Vorath Tower then? Yes, we will strike the road on the far side of the forest. I hope it will be safe. There are strange things said of that wood. Strange things? What manner of strange things? It is said, for instance, that the deeper parts of the wood are Elventory? Elven territory. Places of where the world of elves marches more closely with the world of men, and that it may not be safe to trespass there casually. Ah, Harem considered this for a while, then said, we shall try to move across without giving offense to any. We can also hope that the tales of the forest will convince our pursuers not that we would not go that way either. Dareth Gan frowned. I don't like it. There is some risk, no doubt, but it ought to throw off our pursuers off our track, which would be to our benefit. It seemed at first a forest like any other. There were trees, large old trees which lifted mighty branches toward the sky. There was underbrush, willows, thorns, and the like, and here and there a trail made by animals of some sort. It was these trails which made it possible for the travelers to go through, for the brush was otherwise too thick to allow passage. During the first day, nothing untoward happened. In the evening, however, after they had lit their fire and eaten supper, they heard a faint and far off chiming of bells. Dareth Gan heard it first, and said, Hush, do you hear that? What? There are bells ringing far away. Do you hear them? Harum listened carefully. Yes, I can hear them now. What are they? Gareth, Ga- Dareth Gan shrugged, but his expression belied his casual manner. I don't know. They seem far away in any case. From time to time that evening they continued to hear the bells, but the sound never drew nearer. When they had eaten, they spent a while practicing their swords, then prepared for bed. Harem noticed something. Suddenly, Harem noticed something. Look! He pointed at a tree. Perched up in the branches was a man-like figure. He was squatting down, and his knobby knees were higher than his head. His long, skinny arms stretched out to the sides, as though for balance, and the hands rested lightly on the tough bark of the old bough. He was naked, save for some wrapping round his loins. He did not seem to be armed. He had thick, dark hair growing in a bunch on his head, and his eyes shone in the light of the dying fire. His long, pointed ears twitched back and forth rapidly. He said nothing. Hiram stood up. Hail! He called. A good evening to you. The ears twitched again, and the long arms moved, and suddenly he was gone. Hiram moved towards the tree. Dareth Gan stepped up and took his arm. Wait! Where did it go? Up higher into the tree and away, I believe. There may be more of this sort, waiting out in the darkness for us. You are right, and I believe it would be wise for us to take turns keeping watch tonight. Despite the watch they kept, taking turns sleeping, they did not see the strange being again that night. But the next day, around noon, they were riding along a narrow animal trail through the deep woods. Haram looked up suddenly to see the spindly creature, seated in a tree and watching them ride by. He pointed it out to Dareth Gan, and they watched it warily as they rode. Its face seemed utterly without expression, though it seemed to be more than a mere animal. Suddenly, it was just as had done the previous night. It vanished. From time to time, it would reappear along their track as they went, always squatting somewhere. It seemed to favor the boughs of trees, though it showed itself occasionally under a bush, and once atop an old moss-covered rock. It never said a word, only watched them with pale yellow eyes as they rode by. It was noon of the day after they met the elves. As they were riding along a game trail, two men stepped out in front of them. They were tall and slender, fair-haired, with braided hair hanging down their backs. They had bows and arrows slung behind them. They wore well-kept chainmail and helmets, and long swords at their belts. Overall, they wore gray cloaks, and in their hands they held sturdy spears, which they presented toward the travelers. The one on the right spoke first, in a language which Haram did not understand. He looked at Dareth Gan, who said, "They are elves, and they are asking what we do here. You understand their language?" "A little." "Then speak to them and explain our intentions." Dareth Gan spoke, a little stumblingly, in the same language as the elves, who did not seem to relax a whit at hearing their tongue spoken. The elf spokesperson listened to Dareth Gan's speech, then answered in the language of Eridar, though strangely accented. "You have chosen an ill time to be wandering these lands. There is trouble abroad, and I myself cannot give you permission to pass through. This is the province of my commander." "Can you take us to him, then?" "No, I cannot leave my post here, but I can send a pair of my warriors to guide you." He put his two fingers in his mouth and whistled, and a dozen or so elves, armed and armored, much as he and his companion, stepped out of the brush along the trail. The leader of the band spoke briefly in his own language, and two of the band stood forth. "We will take you to the commander, and be careful that you do not stray from the trail as they guide you, for as I said, these are perilous times. If they think you are trying to escape, they will slay you." "Escape? No, we only wish to pass through the woods in peace. If it must be that must seek permission, then permission we will seek." So off they went, with one of the elves going on ahead, and one bringing up the rear. The elf who led them stepped so lightly and quietly that Haram could neither hear the sound of his footsteps nor see any place where his footsteps had disturbed the ground. He tried conversing with the fellow leading them, but the elf only turned and spoke brusquely to him in Elvish. "He says he does not speak your language," said Dareth Gan, "and from his tone, I think he does not wish to speak to you at all." So they continued to ride on in silence. A little while later, the gangly creature, which had showed itself beside their path previously. The elf at the rear saw it as well and brought it to the attention of the one in the lead. The leader also glanced at it and said something in return. Haram looked at Dareth Gan, who shrugged. "A word I don't know, probably a name by the sound of it, and I think it best not to ask too many questions." The leader turned and spoke briefly and brusquely again. Dareth Gan translated. "He says that this is no country for idle chatter. He will thank us to keep our mouths shut." Haram nodded. So they traveled on in silence for a ways further, coming at last into a large clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large tent, done in red and gold. Its front flap was open, and in front of that flap was a simple wooden table. At the table, with his back to the tent, sat an elf, working over what seemed to be lists and maps. The elf in front led them forward to the tent. Suddenly other elves appeared before and around them. The elf ahead of them spoke briefly, and Haram noticed he was as brusque with his own kind as he had been with the travelers under his escort. Thus they came to the tent, the two elves, Haram, Darethgan, and several curious elves at a little more distance. The elf at the table looked up, and the leader of their escort, spoke to him. "This must be the commander," thought Haram. "This fellow is being polite to him." And so it seemed, for the elf at the table and so it seemed, for the elf at the table dismissed the two escorts with a few words, then looked up at the two travelers. Haram swung down from his horse and saw that Dareth Gan had done the same thing. He looked at the commander. This was an older elf, and his dress was somewhat more elaborate than that of the others. His his chain armor had small golden flowers decorating the shoulders and the chest, and his sword had a slightly more ornate hilt. He wore no cloak, but hose of a dark brown. He wore no cloak, but he had hose of dark brown, such that if he were to put on one of the gray cloaks, he would easily be able to disappear in the forest. His head was bare, and it was clear that he was an elder, for his brow was weathered and wrinkled. "I am Kith Walden, and I command here. Who are you, and what are you doing in these parts?" he demanded. "My name is Haram, and my companion is Dareth Gan. We are traveling through the woods, and mean no harm to anyone." Oh boy, I'm sorry, guys. "Passing through, there's a skepticism. There's skepticism in the eyes of the old elf. Why do you pass through? Do not men usually avoid passing through this part of the wood?" "Yes, they do, and that is part of the reason why we wish to pass through. We are being pursued, and hope thus to discourage the pursuit." "You are fugitives, then? You did not come to claim your patrimony for your comrade?" "No, not at all." A hint of laughter showed in the eyes of the old elf. "No, I suppose not. And you did not even think that your companion would be recognized for what he is, and thus perhaps give you free passage through our land?" Dareth Gan could hold his peace no longer. "No, not at all. My father stayed long enough with my mother to get that child on her and then left," he said bitterly. "The tale was that he could not take her with him immediately, as there was some sort of contention in elf country. But then we all know how many women have been deluded by such stories through the ages, and that and many will be in ages to come. I have no feeling anything is owed to me by an elf, whoever he may be." "And what might your father's name be?" "Lasar Gan was the name he gave my mother." "Lasar Gan?" mused the commander. "Yes, there's a tale behind that, but we shall have little time to converse here. As you may have noticed, we are at war. The question now is what to do with the pair of you. We cannot allow you to wander freely." "We are prisoners, then?" asked Haram. The commander shook his head. "That is one choice. I would prefer not to make you prisoners, though. Would you consent to be guests staying in a comfortable tent I shall provide you, as well as As well fed as can be managed in these times with your weapons and equipment with you. This should last for a day, 2 days at the most, after which time you will be free to go on your way. The alternative to that is that we take your weapons away, put you in bonds until it is safe to decide what to be done with you. Hiram glanced at Dareth Gann, who looked back at Kith Walden. I will not presume to speak for the both of us, but but for myself, I will accept the status as guest, so long as it does not last for an unconscionable length of time. I will agree to that as well. Sorry, I will agree to that as well, said Dareth Gann. Kith Walden nodded. Very well then. I expect matters to be settled in a day's time. 3 at the most. At that time, I will give all the explanations I can give. By nightfall, Hiram was almost sorry he had given his word so easily. To be sure, they were still granted their arms and armor. The food was adequate, and the tent was comfortable enough, but they were not permitted to go more than a spear shaft from the front entrance, and even to go outside was frowned on. The guards were under orders to converse with them as little as possible. They answered not at all when Hiram spoke to them, and they answered tersely when Dareth Gann spoke in Elvish. They were not prisoners, but for all Hiram could see, they may as well be. He was wakened in the middle of the night by shouting and clashing of arms. I just like the idea that possibly it's like a bar fight in the camp. We know that's not it, but you never know. So that's the end of chapter 23. Give me a minute. Alrighty. Okay. Oh, I want to know what's going on in these woods with the elves. And yeah, I'm also having all sorts of other ideas, but I'll talk about those at a later time. For now, shall we continue on to chapter 24? Hold on, I just one moment. Sorry, give me 1 second, guys. All ready. Bum, bum, bum. Like I said, this is why I can't do a lot of chatting on the channel because I have to like drop what I'm doing because it's just me. So it's hard for me to like without dropping everything to do that. But that's okay because it was right before we go on to the last chapter. And it's okay because people can still mark this in your stream like this, and you can like go back to it later because people are talking about not being able to about just stopping by to say hi. Hi, everybody. Thank you for stopping by. um, and that's kind of what it is. This is supposed to be casual anyway, so I'm I would like to stay unprofessional, but not right now. Right now, this is just me telling the story because I really do like telling stories and I like reading this out loud. So, that's how that goes. All right. Last chapter for tonight. Chapter 24. What was going on in the elven camp? The tent was not completely dark. There was sufficient moonlight coming in through the open flap that Harum could see Dareth Gann was also awake. Dareth Gann went to the opening and spoke to the guard, who responded brusquely. Dareth Gann turned to Harum and said, I asked what was happening. He said that the camp was being attacked, and that I should get back inside. Harum nodded. Whoever is attacking, he said, will they be able to tell that we're only guests here? I think it would be best if we were to dress and arm ourselves. The sound of battle rapidly grew closer, and there was much shouting in Elvish as the defenders rallied themselves. Several times while the two were dressing, arrows tore through the walls of the tent. When they were ready, Harum went to the front of the tent and peered out carefully. The battle had come to within 3 or 4 spear lengths of the tent. The elves had formed a line which stretched in a wavy fashion across the clearing. A little in front of the tent, Kith Wolden and his guard held the center of the line, under the standard of the blue swan on a white field. On the far side of the line were the enemy, leaping and hammering against that line. Goblins, said Harum. But these were not the goblins who wandered throughout Eredar in rugged makeshift bands, armed and armored and with whatever they could find. These were larger and grouped according to the armor they wore. There was a small group that wore plate armor, and yet another contingent, perhaps a quarter of the total number, who wore chainmail. Oh, sorry, I just lost myself. Where was I? Got it. I got it. Yeah. On the flanks of these were contingents in scale armor, studded leather, or merely padded cloth jackets. Elves are hard pressed. Perhaps we should join them. Kith Wolden may not thank us. On the other hand, if they are beaten, as they might well be, we are dead. Thus we lend our aid while it yet might do some good. It was only afterward that Harum realized that he never even thought of running away. If you go, then so will I. Harum leaped out, past the guard, whose attention His attention was all on the battle, and rushed forward. Even as he moved, he saw the elves' standard fall. In the shouting, shrieking, hammering din, it was not possible to truly say that the goblin noise redoubled at that sight, but it seemed that they flung themselves more wildly at the center of the line. Then Harum was there, confronted by a goblin chief near as tall as a man, wearing plate armor and swinging a large mace in both hands. The mace swung right to left. Harum swayed back out of range as the weight carried the goblin's upper body nigh halfway around. Harum struck. The goblin went down. Others were coming up to take his place, though, and Harum took a hard blow on his shield and returned it. Then a red haze began to descend over his eyes, and he heard himself shouting in the goblin tongue. Then the sun was rising, and Harum was leaning against a tree, his sword hanging down at his right side. He was panting, and around him he could see 8 or 10 dead goblins. There was a throbbing pain in his chest, and he looked down. There was a large rent in his armor, and blood was pouring forth. So, he thought, one is not immune to wounds while battle mad. Then a feeling of weakness began to come over him. Suddenly, Dareth Gann was beside him, saying something. So, this is how it is to die, thought Harum. Conscience left him. He woke again, lying in a soft bed, looking toward the flap of the tent, through which sunlight poured. He seemed to recall half waking a time or two before, once as his wound was being dressed, then again late at night, to see the worried face of Dareth Gann leaning over him. He looked around. It was a large tent, and there were a number of other beds beside his, each one with a wounded elf in it. There was another elf, a healer, checking the bandages on each of the patients. Harum was aware of a great hunger. He opened his mouth to call the healer to ask for something to eat. He must have fallen asleep, for it was suddenly twilight, and the healer was gone, and he was still hungry. He did not go to sleep immediately this time, but lay there awake for a while. There was a movement at the door of the tent, and he looked. Dareth Gann walked in, looked around, and came to Harum's bed. So you are back with us then? He was smiling as he spoke, but it was clear he did not feel so light of heart as his words made out. Harum tried to speak, but his mouth and throat were so dry that all he could manage was a weak croaking sound. Dareth Gann immediately took up a cup from beside the bed, filled it from a water bucket beside the door of the tent, and brought it back. After Harum had drunk a little, he was able to speak at last. The battle was won then? Oh yes, the battle was won. Just about the time you hurtled yourself against the goblins. More forces of elves were coming out of the trees. How do you feel? Very well, save for what seems to be a hole in my chest. I thought I was about to die. They said you were very near to it. Some of the elven heals used some strong spells on you, I understand. I suppose. I am hungry, Derek Gann. Do you think you could steal a crust of bread for me? I'll do what I can. I'll be right back. Out the door of the tent and was gone for some time. But when he finally returned, he was carrying a bowl in his hand. Broth, he said, a little apologetically. The healers have said you should not try to eat anything solid just yet. You've been unconscious off and on for 3 days, and they are concerned as to whether or not your stomach will stand it. Well, broth will have to do then. And he found indeed that he was weaker than he thought, for he could not pull himself into a sitting position. Gareth Gann put a hand under his head and lifted it sufficiently for him to drink down the broth. Despite his hunger, there was a moment when he thought that he might not be able to keep it down, but in the end his stomach settled itself. Kith Wolden wishes to speak to you when you are well enough. I will tell him to come in the morning. Fine. I doubt I'll be going anywhere soon. After a few moments, Harum closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was morning, and Dareth Gann was still there. You have been here all night? He asked. I? No, not at all. I went in and slept and then came back this morning. But his eyes said that he had not slept it well. Are you feeling better this morning? Yes, I am, said Harum. And as he said it, he realized with surprise how much better he was feeling than he had the previous day. Dareth Gann nodded. The healers said they had used strong spells on you because of the nature of your wound. They said that without the spells you might well have died, and the spells would continue to work on you for some days yet. Now, if you wish, I will go find some food for you. Yes, if you would. Then Dareth Gann was gone, and Harum lay there waiting. He wondered if he had to try to get out of bed, and as he was wondering about that, the healer came in. The healer was an old elf with a long face. He moved from bed to bed in the tent, looking at bandages, feeling wounds with his palm, and inspecting them all closely. Occasionally he would say a word or two, but at the first he was too far away for Harum to hear. When he came closer, he realized the words were in Elvish, so he would not be able to understand them in any case. When he came to Harum, the elf peered at him closely, then put a palm on his chest at the site of the wound. Harum felt a tickling, which seemed to begin deep in his chest and work its way out. Then the old healer removed his hand and looked at his patient. He muttered something in Elvish, and was about to leave when Harum said, Sir, do you think it would be well for me to get out of bed yet? What? Oh, you do not understand our language then. The elf himself spoke the language of Eredar without fault, save for a slight musical cadence. Ah, yes, you will probably be well enough to get up later today, but when you do get up, see that you do not work too hard. You have been grievously wounded, and your body has been working hard to repair its hurts. Thank you. I shall remember. The elf continued to stand there for a moment, his face melancholy. When he turned and walked out of the tent, then he turned and walked out of the tent. As he went, he was muttering something under his breath in Elvish. Dareth Gann, coming in, glanced at him in startlement. Coming over to Harum's bed, he said, You are fortunate. As well as the broth, they are allowing you a small piece of bread this morning. Did he say aught to you? He jerked a thumb in the direction of the tent door where the healer had just left. Between sips of broth, Harum recounted what had passed between himself and the healer. As he finished, he could see Dareth Gann was near to laughter. What is it then? What is so amusing? It was just what the healer was saying when he left. Warriors, he said. So they all promise, and yet none of them do. Harum himself laughed at that. But at that moment, another figure appeared in the tent doorway. It was Kith Wolden himself, and he looked up and down the rows of the wounded, then walked over to where Harum lay. So you could not keep to your bargain, he said, but he was smiling as he said it. Harum attempted to shrug, but found it was difficult to do so while lying down. You were hard pressed, he said. As I told my comrade at the time, better we should lend our aid when it's still of some use. You credit with me with so little skill as a commander, then? We were the bait for an ambush, you see. I had already given the signal, and at that time you were rushing into the thick of the goblins, screaming in their own language. The trap was closing. And we were to guess at this? You told us nothing, Commander, and we had to deal with matters as we saw them. Kith Wolden's expression turned grave. And yet we could hardly trust you, could we? You are strangers wandering in our land, and your companion has a grudge against at least one elf. How far does that grudge extend to other elves? We could not know. We could only try to keep you out of our way. And I will admit that the enemy came at us a little by surprise. There are more ways of traveling in this land, by road or trail. And thus it was that the fighting took place near enough to your tent for, for you to for you even to see it, let alone take part in it. And so you came at the moment when our standard was falling, and that might have turned the battle, or at least made our ambush less effective. For that, I owe you something. Hiram shook his head. I feel no debt. I, I feel no debt, Commander. I have my own reasons for disliking goblins. The elf nodded. So I would guess. There must be a tale behind that. And the way you speak the goblin language? By the way, in a battle between goblins and elves, I may not it may not be a wise notion to be heard shouting in the goblin language. There are some who might misunderstand. Heron smiled. Even when I'm fighting goblins myself? Even then. But the healer made me promise that I would not weary you with my presence. He said that you probably would be up and about this afternoon. In that case, I would if that is the case, I would appreciate it if you come to my tent to talk further. I will be happy to. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so that is the end of this chat of the chapter 24. So, what does the commander of the elves wish to talk to Haram about? Will there be? There's probably something good coming on. So, yeah, for those of you, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the chat. Like I said, not always able to talk really quickly, so when I can, I try, but then it kind of detracts from the story. So I might just do a quick check-in after I'm done talking or between chapters like that was happening. So between chapters I can probably say one or two things. Otherwise, chat amongst yourselves. Yeah. And again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Um, YouTube, I will talk to you all again tomorrow. Yeah, and then I'm just going to say a few things to the Twitch people before I go. It's okay. Thank you for tuning in.